Hey Mini enthusiasts, how you doing? Welcome back, I hope you're well and I hope you're having a great day. Today we are on project, I'm going to give it a name, I'm going to call it Project Bruce. Bit odd, the number plate sort of spells Brucey if you squint your eyes a little bit and little bit imaginative, and my dad's called Bruce, so I don't know. Project Bruce, unless someone's got a better suggestion. So we're on Project Bruce today. The plan is to get it running, get it driving, and I'm doing that because it's really important to me at the moment with all the minis I've got round that I can move them with ease. I don't have space in the garage to bring that car in to be working on it. Things might change a little bit in the winter and I might put one of these outside covered up and make some space in the garage for it when I start getting into the cutting, grinding, welding, that sort of thing. But for the moment, I just need to be able to move it around. So I don't want to be pushing it because that's hard work. So I'm going to get it running, and I have no idea what I'm doing with this car yet. We will just see how things progress. I'll keep chipping away at it. Like I say, the theme is going to be a budget build. And I know you all put in the comments that that's just not going to happen, Keith, and sometimes I actually doubt myself. But we're going to start off with the plan for it to be a budget build. But already I've failed. If you can see behind me, there is part of a later MPI Cooper interior. It's in fantastic condition. I sat there on Facebook the other night. I see it come up for sale and I thought, I'm going to need a interior for Project Bruce once it's all finished. So I ended up buying that. I don't know whether I will use it in the project or whether I'll put the Mini 30 stuff back in or whether I'll sell the Mini 30 stuff. But I'm already spending money that I shouldn't be. So I think I spent 350 quid on that interior. So anyway, it's quite a long video today. Again, I tend to change the formats of the videos round a little bit. Sometimes I do stuff that's really creative. Sometimes I do the time-lapse stuff. Today's video is really just a point and shoot. There's not much sped up. It's really the whole sort of process from start to finish of getting the car running. And yeah, like you might have seen in the title description, I did not expect this engine to be C-solid. So that was a real curveball for me. When I spoke to the guy, he said it had been running fine and then the starter motor had packed up. I don't know what's happened there, but the engine is seized solid. So I just go through my process bit by bit of how I'm going to get it running, how we're going to get it working again, and how we're going to get it driving. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video. It is a bit of a long one, so sit back, grab a coffee, get your popcorn, whatever. It's about 35 minutes, and I'll see you again next week. Cheers. Right, so let's try and get this started. It'll be first start for a long time, I think. I don't know exactly, maybe a couple of years. First thing we got to do is get a battery on it. We need a battery because it hasn't got a battery. I do notice there is a starter solenoid just sitting down in there, so I'm not even sure whether the solenoid's fitted, but we start with a battery. As you can see, there's a battery negative cable there and it's really corroded, so there's no point putting a battery on with a corroded terminal like that. So we'll borrow the battery off Project TARDIS. I've ordered a new battery for it online, but for now we'll borrow a battery. We'll get that earth tag cleaned up. Let's just go around the front and see if there is a solenoid on it. Yes, there is, so I'm assuming the solenoid's been replaced at some point. Yeah, let me get a battery on and then we'll move to the next step. Right, so there we go. Borrowed the battery off TARDIS. Like I say, I have ordered a new battery anyway, and it is another Yuasa YBX 1000 online. I found the great thing about the restorations I've done, I don't throw many bits away, so I keep hold of lots of old bits. So there's a battery terminal that come off one of the old minis, which is in near perfect condition. We've cleaned up the earthing point there, put a new bolt in it. I've used some dielectric grease on both terminals, and I've cleaned up inside the terminal as well. So That's worth doing because you can get a high resistance inside there and you can get a voltage drop straight across the terminal. So you've got to make sure the terminals are clean and the inside of the terminals are clean. Now, I get a bit of a bee in my bonnet about fitting the right battery on a Mini, because lots of people fit different batteries: 063s, 065s, 075s, 027s. For, I don't know about early Minis, but for later Minis, the right battery's an 038. There's a couple of reasons why it's the right battery. Is if you get an 063, the terminals are the other way around. So the positive terminal is over this side and the battery's physically lower than an 038. It doesn't have as much battery height. And what I see a lot of times is the positive terminal is really, really close to the inside of the battery tray. Now, if you've got it clamped down, that's fine, but a lot of people don't have them clamped down, or if they're clamped down and you brake very hard, there's a chance that battery could move forward and short out on that part of the battery tray. So you'll notice with an 038, the terminal's on the other side and you've got loads and loads of clearance down here, so there's no issues at all. Now, I'm sure someone will pick me up here, but I've connected these terminals in the incorrect order. You should really fit the positive first and then fit the negative. And the reason for doing that is, if you fit the positive first, when you're tightening up the negative, if you were to go round too far with your spanner and touch some bodywork, it won't matter because it's only the negative terminal. But as you can see, when I tighten up this positive now, if I were to get a little bit enthusiastic and touch the metal, I could cause a spark there, but I'm being extra careful. We're not going to bolt this battery in because it's going to come out again. But we've got a new terminal on, we've cleaned up the earth point, we've cleaned up the terminals on the battery and on the actual clamps themselves, and yeah, that battery's a good charged battery. The other thing about fitting the correct battery as well is a lot of people fit a bigger battery to mask a problem. So they'll fit a bigger battery because the battery keeps going flat. Well, the battery keeps going flat either because it's got a drain on or you're not using enough. All you're doing by fitting a bigger battery, is costing yourself more money, but you're not actually curing the fault with the car. And the new bigger battery will still go flat as well. It will just take a little bit longer to go flat. And you've got to consider the charging system as well. So if I were to fit a 500 amp battery on this, yeah, it's got plenty of cranking power, but a Mini doesn't need it. It only needs 125, 150 amps cranking power. If you've got a really high compression, maybe a little bit more, or a high torque starter, maybe a little bit more, but you don't need 500 amps. If you're running a big stereo or something like that, then you're worried about the amp hour capacity. So yeah, you might want a bigger battery then, but you've got to consider the charging system. So you know, most Minis are going to be a 40-45 amp alternator. That alternator has to recharge that battery when you're using it. So if you fit a massive great big battery on there and you only use it for short runs, that alternator is just not going to be capable of recharging the battery. Anyway, rant over, we got the battery on. Next steps. Thought I'd just show you this as well. So this is the battery cover, but someone has made one out of plywood. They've done a really, really neat job. All the edges are nicely rounded off. Someone loved this car at some stage, didn't they? And they spent quite a bit of time doing that. Right. So we're definitely not going to crank it over at the moment, but we do want to just put the keys in and see if we get ignition lights. Oh, there's something not right there because the ignition is not on. Yeah, I have got a, yeah, ignition light is on, and I'm assuming that's probably oil pressure light. So why is the ignition on already? It's also, the fuel gauge is reading as well. Is a high beam light on? Yeah, something iffy. Yeah, high beam warning's working. So the ignition seems to be powered up, even though the keys are not in. Now, I'm no rocket scientist. I see that old solenoid in the back there. I'm wondering whether someone's connected the solenoid up wrong. Let's have a look. Right, I think I can see the problem straight away, and I think someone has been playing around, obviously having issues. So we've got a white and yellow wire here which goes into this bit of loom. It's then got a chock block. It then goes to a blue wire, and then it goes up to the positive side of the coil. So I'm thinking someone's connected it onto that part of the solenoid to get a positive to the coil. So maybe trying to bypass something. So let's just disconnect that, because that's not right. We've got our battery cable coming in this side. We've got all our main live cables here. They're brown, but it's really grubby to see it. And then we've got our output after the solenoid, or output from the solenoid to the starter motor. And we've got our brown wire here, which should be on there. So someone's taken that brown wire off and they fitted this wire here, which went straight to the coil. So not quite sure why they've done that. And just looking, I've got the trusty Haynes manual here, so I'm looking, they can be a little bit difficult to interpret sometimes, but we've got our battery live in, we've got our live out of the solenoid, we've got the alternator main lives coming in here, and then we have our white and red, which is, that's the ignition switch through inhibitor to the solenoid. So that excites the solenoid, kajunk, then you get power from the battery to the starter motor. So I've disconnected that. We want to see if the starter motor actually cranks now. Well, let's just go and see if that ignition light's right. So that looks better. We've got our ignition lights off now. So that was obviously that white and yellow wire on the solenoid on that side was just obviously backfeeding everything. If I turn the ignition on now, yes, we get ignition lights as normal. So that looks right. Now we want to see, I'm suspecting there might be other problems here, and that's why someone's put that wire in, but we want to see if the engine cranks. Before we do that, let's just do a couple of quick checks. It's not been started for I don't know how long. Let's check oils in it. I'll probably take the spark plugs in just in case. Like I say, the air filter lid's been off, so I doubt water would have got inside the engine, but just in case, it looks dry, but just in case there's water inside the engine, we don't want to hydraulic it. So oil's a bit difficult to check, because on an auto you have to run it first to check the oil, and can I get the dipstick out? Just. But yeah, it's over maximum, and that's not the correct way of checking the oil on an auto. Like I say, you have to run it first, leave it for a minute, and then check it, but we're not able to do that. But there is oil in there. Let's whip these plugs out now, so that, like I say, when it cranks over, if there is any hydraulic issues or anything like that, it's not going to damage the engine. Right, so I've got the plugs out. The plugs all look pretty good actually. I'd be worried if there was corrosion on them or something like that, but I tried turning the engine by hand and it is locked, and it's not the alternator that's seized, it's not the water pump that's seized, because that moves. It is, well, it could be the starter motor jammed, or it is the engine itself seized. Now I've got a boroscope, but I can't really show it that well on camera. I've just got my torch down here, and there is a bit of corrosion on the top of the pistons and on the inside of the bore, which is what my concern with. It's not wet inside there, but there is a little bit of corrosion from where it stood. So I suspect the rings are probably stuck. Now I've got to be quite careful now, because we could end up doing damage if we don't do it properly. So what I'm probably going to do is put penetrating oil mixed with a bit of engine oil into here, into each plug hole, and just leave it, let it penetrate. In the meantime, I'm going to take the starter motor out so I can turn the ring gear, because obviously being it's an auto, we can't just put it in gear and rock it backwards and forwards. It's very hard to get on a crank as well, but I might be able to just get a screwdriver in and just turn the ring gear a little bit. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame that I should have checked this before I bought it. But yeah, the engine is seized. I don't think it's seized really badly. I think it's probably just corrosion on the piston rings to the bore, to the cylinder walls, just probably where it's been sat. But yeah, we need to be careful here and unseize it gently. Fingers crossed. Right, so the next bit I'm going to do, I'm going to oil down the bores and I'm going to take the starter motor out. Right, so I started out with penetrating oil down the bores, then a bit of 3-in-1. I waited until the penetrating oil soaked away, then a bit of 3-in-1, and finally a bit of engine oil in each one. I've left it for about an hour and a half. I've now got the starter motor out. I've just tested the starter motor on the bench and it works. So now what I'm going to be able to do is just get on the back of that ring gear and just try and see if I can move the engine, which at the moment it's pretty stuck. As you can see, I don't want to break a tooth off the ring gear or anything like that, or damage the bell housing. I think it's just going to be a case of me just nudging it backwards and forwards a bit and seeing how we get on. I might just grab a bigger lever bar so I don't damage myself. Right, this is properly seized up, but do you know what, if I can unseize it, it might smoke, you know. I don't know what I want to do with this engine, but it's all about, I just want to get it running so I can move it around. I've got a massive lever bar on it now. If I can just get it to move a little bit, let's give it a bit of brute force with this one, and hopefully it'll move. When I can get it to engage, that is. Or the other way, here we go. Yes, so that does look like it's moving a bit. Probably not going to do the starter ring gear much good. Yeah, it moved a little bit again. Little bit of progress. It is just a case of working backwards and forwards now. There we go. It's only a little bit of movement, but it is movement. Right, I'm going to carry on persevering for a bit. Right, it's getting easier, which is good. But it is literally like you got to turn it one tooth at a time. There we go, see. Every movement it just gets a little bit easier. So I'm probably just going to spend the next half hour moving this backwards and forwards. I'll mark the flywheel. We'll try and get 1 degree or 1 turn of rotation. When I feel it's easy enough to put the starter motor back in, we'll put the starter back in and let the starter do the hard work. Okay, so I've turned the engine over. I managed to get over 3 turns. It was turning pretty freely, apart from when it comes to top dead centre on each cylinder, it tightens up a bit. Hopefully it's enough for the starter motor to turn now. I'm going to just bypass the ignition switch because I don't think the ignition switch is working. I need to look into that more in a minute. It might be the inhibitor switch. So I'm just going to provide a live straight down to the start signal onto the solenoid, which will engage the starter motor. We're not going to give it much mechanical sympathy because I think I've got it to the point every cylinder's halfway down the bore at the moment, so I want the starter to go and then just keep going, because if I stop with it at the top of the bore, I'm probably going to have to take it out again and wind it over by hand. I've put this rag here just because obviously I've put loads of bore oil and that down the cylinders, and if it does crank over quickly it'll all be in my face. So let's go, fingers crossed, let's see what happens. Oi. Yes, I'm glad I put a rag there now. Initially that actually gave me a bit of a shock. Although it's only 12 volts, it's really high current, so it gives me a bit of a tingle, but it's turning over. Let me get that rag out of the way, get a fresh rag. Hang on.
Was it seized just because it's not been used for a long time?
Yeah. So that's the engine unseized. Next up, I think we'll check what the fuel is like. I can actually smell a bit of fuel, and we'll put the plugs back in and check what's going on with the ignition switch. Right, let's see if there's any petrol getting through, pumped up to the carb anyway. I think there is, because I can smell it and it's dripping here. We just want to see what it's like. I bet it's not very nice. Okay, that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? So, yeah, we don't want to be running it on that. It stinks as well. So we need to do something about the fuel. I might just rig up a can, gravity feeding into it, or yeah, I might rig up a can off the other side of the fuel pump. Next thing is spark. So I've got a spark plug here. It's earthed against the head. I don't think it's sparking. Let's have a look. Yes, there is a spark. It's a pretty weak looking one, so we'll just take a look at the points quickly. We might need to just clean them up, gap them. But that's encouraging. You can hear it's turning over nice and freely now, can't you? Yes, we've got a nice points gap there. the ignition on, which I can just move the points by hand and I can hear them sparking. I'll just give them a bit of a clean off. I think I've got a points file, if not a bit of wet and dry between them. Right, so the next bit I was looking at was obviously it wouldn't start a motor, wouldn't activate on the key. I thought it was the inhibitor switch. So what I did was go underneath. The inhibitor switch on these earlier automatics is on the back of the gear shifter. So I just put a fuse link in between, just basically bypassing the inhibitor switch. That didn't work, so then it was a case of a bit of process of elimination with the multimeter, making sure that we've got a live feed on the red and white wire when you turn the ignition on into the start position, which I did, which means the ignition switch is okay. The inhibitor switch is okay, so somewhere between the inhibitor switch and the ignition we had a break, or we lost the wiring. So what I found is down here, this is the wiring to the inhibitor switch, and someone had cut into it, put some bullet connectors on and bypassed it. Now that might be for an alarm or a hidden immobilizer switch, or in fact, look, there is a little button up here. I bet it's that. I bet they've put in a like an emergency, I don't know, I'm going to try actually, but at the moment, so when we want to start, we now have starter motor on the ignition. Let me plug them back in. I wonder whether it's this switch. Yeah, it's exactly as I thought. So those wires, they've interrupted it and it goes to this switch here. So if I turn that on, but why I don't get why you would do that. It's just an extra, you've got the ignition switch, why would you need a, I suppose it might be a little bit of anti-theft, wouldn't it? But you'd hide the switch surely. But anyway, we'll do away with that. We'll put it back to how the wiring should have been originally, because I hate things like that. Next thing I'm going to do actually, I think I'm just going to take the fuel tank out now. So thanks to the generosity of a subscriber and a viewer to the channel, One Chish, Chris, I have a spare fuel tank, 7.5 gallon fuel tank. So rather than faff around with this stale fuel, I'm just going to take the tank out, drain the lines, empty the carburettor, put a new fuel tank in it with fresh petrol. Right, that's the tank out. Thankfully, on carburetted me like that, taking the tank out is a very easy job. It's just a breather, just a fuel pipe at the bottom, which you need to clamp off. I've just clamped that and then just cut it. But I can't get a light down in there and the camera, but it's actually clean inside the tank, so it's just stale fuel in the line. So we're just going to turn that tank upside down and drain it out through the top, get any sediment out, and then put it back in and put some fuel in it. Right, so I did go with the fuel tank from Chris, primarily because I haven't got anywhere to store the old fuel at the moment. So new tank in, a couple of gallons of fuel. We've had the float out, just making sure that's free. There was fuel in the float chamber, which I've cleaned out. And the next thing I need to do is just pump the first bit of fuel, because it will be old stale fuel in the fuel lines. Pump that out, and then I think we'll wazz a new set of plugs in it, give it the best chance possible, and then give it a try. Just Gonna collect the fuel in a cup here. That looks a million times better, doesn't it? Brilliant. Right, I'll stick the float back in, new set of plugs in it, and we're good to go then. I thought they were a new set of plugs, but they're not. They were in a new box. They look reasonably new, but they are nice, clean and dry. The other plugs are just wet where I've been cranking it over, and obviously a bit oily because of the oil down the bores. I have also just checked, I didn't capture it, I forgot about it. The oil light goes out, so I've cranked it over just to make sure the oil light goes out and it's got oil pressure, which it has. The spark is a little bit weak. It could probably do with a set of points and condenser. I don't think I have a set though. In fact, I probably do. I think I have the old distributor off TARDIS, but we'll try it first, I think. It's likely to smoke really badly when it starts up because of the oil I've had down the bores. Make sure we got choke. Yeah, I think we are good to go. Might just give it a bit of a helping hand with a bit of brake cleaner, bit of additional choke. Let's see what happens. Well, it runs. It was a little bit knocky to begin with, but that's not a surprise, to be honest. Bit of a plume of blue smoke out the back. The next thing is, does it drive? Does it actually move? Actually, idle's not too bad. I don't know how long that is since that was started. Could have been 2 years. I might get in it now and see if it drives. the exhaust fell off. I did notice it was loose, I should have tightened it up. But I think that's probably it for this episode. I don't know how long it's going to be, but it starts, it runs, it drives, which just makes it a whole lot easier for me moving it around.